I'm sure most of us have heard the phrase, never judge a book by its cover, and understand its meaning. If I was to ask my students in elementary what that phrase really meant, I would get an answer that has to do with picking out a book that doesn't have the nice cover, but it has a great story. Even though I would remind them of this every single time I went to the library, and it was that day, I would still find them going after the books that had the cool covers. Now, if I was to ask my high schoolers this question, I would probably get a more complex answer. They would understand that this phrase is being more than books or items, but about people as well. And to me, one of the greatest stories that illustrates this idea of not showing prejudice must be found in a fairy tale and film known as Beauty and the Beast. And most of us know of the story and the prince who was spoiled, selfish, and unkind. He turns an old beggar woman away because she has this haggard appearance away from my castle, while all along she was a beautiful enchantress who was reminding him that beauty is found within. For his lack of compassion, she turned him into a beast, and he would remain that way until he found true love. And yes, this story is known as a kitty princess tale, but it has such a deep story with a moral that beauty is found within. In James chapter 2, we begin with James writing a warning to the early church about favoritism. He gives an example of two people coming into the meeting place or the church, and one is dressed with fancy clothes, and the second is poor and dressed in dirty clothes. James said that if they were to give special attention to the rich person, but told the poor one to stand or sit on the floor, they were committing a sin. This topic is so sensitive because it really makes us think and search our hearts to see if we have ever favored others. And I believe that it is part of our sinful human nature to categorize people. But why is it that we find ourselves favoring others? Two of the most likely thoughts of why we do this has to be maintaining pride, or status in society, and truly overall, the thought of what can I get out of this relationship? In Beauty and the Beast, Belle, spoiler alert, is going to be the one to break the enchantment of the beast because she looked on the inside of a person. She could have gone with the eligible bachelor Gaston, but instead she chose to be herself, even though being with him, Gaston, would probably be an elevation to her station. But James writes and quotes the royal law, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. And when we favor some people over others, we have broken this law. This phrase used in the New Living Translation, favor some people over others, in the Greek is known as prosopolepteo, which denotes making distinctions among people based on rank or influence, but showing preference to people with riches or power. James says that even if you keep all the other laws, but you still break one like this, you have broken all the laws. I love this chorus of the song, Great Are You, Lord, which says, it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. The reason I love this song is because it points to the main theme of this first section of chapter 2, which is we are all the same. Regardless of your socioeconomic status, your gender, ethnicity, or educational level, it is God's breath in our lungs to praise his holy name that is important. And as people are made in his image, we must not make distinctions with one another because we are all part of God's family. When it comes to being in relation with one another, we must remember that it is not about receiving, but working as a team to further the mission of Christ. So James finishes the first half of this chapter with a reminder to show mercy with one another because our God is merciful. So let us look to the beauty of his image that is found within us all to unite as a family. And then now in the last half of the chapter, we break into a section of scripture that has been discussed and debated over for centuries. And some would claim as a contradictory to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8, which states, it is by grace you have been saved through faith. James writes to the church in verse 14 in the ESV, what good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? And people have misinterpreted this verse and it causes division in the church even today. Looking back to the Reformation, Martin Luther, who was a Catholic monk in the 1500s, got fed up with the idea that it is works that save you, or you can buy your way into heaven. So he broke from the Catholic Church and created the Protestant Church, which focused on the idea of grace through faith. But some people of the church still missed verse 17 of James chapter 2, which says that so also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. The key word being by itself. As James is writing in this chapter section of the this new section of chapter, he mentions if a brother or sister sees another person is poorly clothed and lacking food and simply says, "Go in peace, be warmed and filled," but fails to provide them what they need, he has shown their faith is dead. The point is, James is trying to say faith by itself without action or works is dead. In verse 18, he says that I will show you my faith by my works, meaning that our works are the fruit of our faith. And if faith is genuine, we should be showing good works. It is not enough to just have faith and believe in God. James says that even the demons believe that and shudder. Sometimes as believers, and I'm guilty of this too, we can just sit and believe that God is going to do a miracle or a move in our lives. But the truth is, if we are not pressing into His Word, engaging in prayer and seeking Him, our faith can become stagnant, or dare I say, die. I am sure some of us have heard the story which involves a Christian man who is faced with approaching floodwaters. Despite several rescue attempts, the man refuses assistance, stating that God will save him. Tragically, he ultimately drowns in the flood. The man had to only exercise the faith of taking a step into the rescue vehicle to be saved, but instead sat on his faith and met his end. As I mentioned earlier, faith is key, but it is the action that brings it together into completion. James ends the chapter telling the story of two biblical characters whose faith and action work together. He first mentions Abraham, who believed in the covenant with God for a son and acted in offering his son to demonstrate his faith to God. James writes in verse 22 that his faith and his actions worked together. It is like he mentioned earlier, faith is not enough and works are not enough to save us as believers. It requires them to work together to make faith complete. We can work ourselves to death, but it will never save us or give fulfillment. And in the same way, we can believe with all our hearts, but if we do not act in our faith, we do not really have it. So before I mention the last character, I just want to reflect on the first half of this chapter on favoritism and how, it ties so well with this last half with the Rahab, the prostitute that James mentions and refers to from the Old Testament, which really tells of her faith and action as she hid the Israelite spies. She had only heard of the awesome power of God and what He had done. And in that belief, because she was not a Jew, she acted in faith. So church, as we go about today, let us remember that His breath in our lungs makes us family, and to live out our faith in action by loving others and seeking more of Christ.